Good afternoon, everyone. We're delighted that you're joining us for the 11th event in McKinsey Sustainability's COP26 programme. My name is Harry Bocott. I'm a senior partner and I lead McKinsey Sustainability in the UK and Ireland, and it's a real privilege to be one of the hosts for our programme throughout the 12 days of COP26. The gathering of global government and business leaders here in Glasgow is an important moment, but the transition to a net zero economy is complicated and messy. And we're here in Glasgow to help leaders understand the practical steps that they can take to decarbonise their assets, to reduce their enabled emissions, to build resilience and to launch new sustainable businesses. And it's wonderful to see so many of you here with us in Glasgow and online. Now, before we get stuck into the content, I want to let everyone know that whether you're here with us in the room or online, you have an equal opportunity to ask questions directly to our panellists. If you're here, take out your phone and scan the QR code. That will help you open up the Slido app. If you're watching online, I very much hope that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen a questions panel. And so that means that if thoughts come to you during the discussion, tap them in and they'll get sent to our moderator who can throw them in front of our panellists. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Brodie Boland. Brodie's based in Washington, D.C., where he leads our work in sustainability in the built environment. Brodie, over to you.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you everyone for joining both here in Glasgow and virtually. We are really excited about this discussion. Extremely important. We're talking about cities. We're talking about how they can take action towards both sustainability, decarbonization, and also resilience. If it's possible to do so, we want to have an action-oriented panel discussion today. And so we'd love the questions. We have a great set of panelists for the discussion today. I also wanted to extend our regrets. The mayor of Freetown, Mayor Aki Sawyer, was not able to make it today. She is dealing with the aftermath of a large oil tanker explosion that happened in Freetown. So our thoughts are with her and with the people of Freetown. We're sorry to miss her, but we hope that can add a little bit of sense of urgency that we know she would have brought to the conversation. So the question today, how can we create action in our cities? How can we accelerate that action? Before we jump into the panel discussion and I introduce the panelists, I wanted to introduce Jonathan Witzel, who's a senior partner at McKinsey & Company and leads our global cities practice, just to set the table a little bit for the conversation. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Brodie. And again, a pleasure to be with you, coming to you live from Shanghai. So action for sustainability and resilience. Let's just take the two challenges in order. In terms of sustainability, what we're talking about here is the fundamentals of mitigating the imminent threat, which is very much associated with the activities that we undertake in our cities. It's our cities that are actually the source of the underlying demand for 70% of the world's carbon emissions. So if we do not get a handle essentially on what we're doing in cities, we will not be able to address the underlying driver of the growth in our emissions over time. So that's on the one hand, we have to address the underlying growth challenge and how to decouple emissions from growth. So that's the first challenge. The other challenge, of course, is resilience, which is to say that there's no way we're getting out of this unscathed. And the consequences of climate change are definitely appearing in our cities, where we think that, conservatively speaking, in a full, unconstrained risk environment, up to 1.6 billion people will be experiencing extreme heat by 2050, lethal heat waves, up from 200 million today, and 800 million people in cities will be experiencing extreme flooding. Being in the country which has just experienced this most unprecedented flooding in Zhengzhou ever, I mean, this is now really starting to resonate, if you will, that the consequences of climate change are very real and very much happening now. So how do we get out of this? What do we do? Where do we do it? How do we do it? We think that we're going to set the table here with sort of three broad challenges. And the first one is, of course, to start to develop the projects that can ultimately shift away our activities from the high carbon to the low or zero carbon, and to protect and to adapt to the consequences of climate change. So finance of those projects, development of those projects, helping money find its way to those projects, that is the first challenge. But a market, and a market that depends on finance, is ultimately only as good as its actors. And so the second challenge is to coordinate those actors, is to try to bring people together around a common information base with a common set of motivations and a common set of understandings, an ability to coordinate and mobilize actors. And in some cases, that might mean creating new actors that simply don't exist today. But we have to face the reality that if we're going to make a market work, we have to actually build and coordinate and mobilize that market, which then leads us to the last point, is that there is pressure here for time. This is not, we don't have an infinity of time. Much of the adaptation and definitely much of the mitigation will have to happen in a very front-loaded fashion, which will mean policy. Policy questions must be addressed, mandates must be made, and this is whether it's true about transportation or land use, but there are many things that we have to do in our cities that can only be decided as a matter of policy. So those are the three challenges: how to find the money, how to coordinate the market, and how to develop the policies. All that said, there is hope. We do see innovative solutions from citizen mobilization in Cape Town to nature-based solutions in Singapore to resiliency guidelines in New York. And we look for this panel and this discussion to help start surfacing more of those positive solutions, things that can help us turn the corner on activities in cities and adapting ourselves to the consequences of climate change. So that's a little bit of a thought starter. Back to you, Brody.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. So I'm really excited about our panelists today. I think they each bring complementary perspectives, kind of a different, really valuable perspective to the discussion. Just to quickly introduce them, I'm not going to go through full bios, but Natalie Palatichev is the CEO of Ivanhoe Cambridge. Ivanhoe Cambridge is a $65 billion real estate investor. Operates all around the world throughout the value chain, right? So development, operations, investment management, the whole package. And so Natalie will bring the perspective of actually having to get a lot of this done at the project level. Mark Watts is the executive director of C40 Cities. C40 is a global network, almost 100 cities that have all committed to climate action, or some of the leading cities in the world. And so Mark will be able to bring that perspective of having actually worked with a bunch of cities, mayors, governments to address these challenges. You've already met Jonathan. Jonathan, of course, again, works with a lot of cities in actually developing the plans to move towards decarbonization, to addressing resilience. And so he'll also be able to bring a bit of that global perspective. Mark, we'll start with you just to start off, and we're going to start with a bit of the challenge. We'll get to the opportunity and the actions quickly, but you look over a wide variety of cities, right? You work with a bunch of cities. You're getting the phone calls from them asking questions. As you think about cities moving towards decarbonizing, adapting, what are the challenges? What are the hurdles that they're trying to overcome?
I mean, I think the simple one is just time. If you look with our group of cities, 100 of the biggest cities in the world, they've all committed to their fair share of halving emissions by 2030, so now within 9 years. That means changing pretty much everything very, very quickly. And at the same time, they're being increasingly hit by climate impacts. So as we've heard, not a climate impact with Meraki Soy today, but so many of our mayors dealing with a wildfire and intense heat, incredible flooding. So just time is against us. But I think, then realizing so much has got to change so quickly, the prioritization. And in fact, that's what C40 and McKinsey have been working, I think, really successfully on together, the work that you've led, Brody. First of all, the piece of work focused acceleration, looking at how do you prioritize the actions to get to that halving emissions by 2030, but then more recently focused adaptation, where we're providing the tool that cities can use to prioritize their resilience actions. I think there is a third thing, though, which we still can't ignore. We're not yet all in this together. So too many of the mayors I work with are doing the right thing and being attacked for it. So Mayor of Los Angeles closing down the gas-fired power stations early, massive investment in renewable energy, and yet is facing a really organised lobby by the gas industry, unfortunately supported by some of the trade unions, to try and overturn that policy. I mean, it's exactly what the city has to do. Or Mayor Hidalgo in Paris, incredibly brave, taking out four-lane highway from the centre of the city, transformed, Paris, but she had to fight tooth and nail against an automotive industry that was trying to push it back. It's not indicative of the business sector generally or the trade union sector, but we need to get everybody aligned around those targets and support the brave politicians, the brave business leaders who are being the pioneers to take us there.
Great. Maybe just a quick follow-up on that. Do you see any, the kind of not all in this together? I could see that at a couple levels, right? Both within a city, but also at the global scale. As you think about your network of cities, you've got 100 cities. Some of them are, leading cities in wealthier countries. Some of them are leading cities in countries that aren't as wealthy. Do you see a sense of common cause or, forming or differences across those profiles of cities?
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about working with mayors and working with cities. It's incredibly collaborative. In the way that we need to see at a nation-state intergovernmental level, we can't solve a global problem without global collaboration. I mean, the simplest indication of this, the C40 mayors came up to Glasgow together on the train from London. They chose to lock themselves in a carriage together for 4.5 hours because they like each other's company and they learn from each other. They're constantly looking to copy things that they can steal, good ideas they can take back to their own city and call it their own. And so it's a really healthy competition based on trying to attract investment into their city, trying to attract the brightest people. But that's a race to the top. That's making your city cleaner air, a nicer place to live, a greater cultural offer, and as well as increasingly, I think, in attracting talent in the sense that you're in a place is really moving in the direction that humanity needs to move, a pioneer city that's going to show what the future looks like. And so, yeah, it's a very collaborative, positive thing. I'm very, to what Jonathan was saying, I think very focused on practical action. The mayors are sharing with each other, how the hell did you just manage to get 1,000 more electric buses than me? I know what they cost. How are you paying for them? And let's take that financial model and apply it in my city.
That's a great, segue. Natalie, you're building things, right? And you're developing things. You're buying assets. You're trying to retrofit them. You're trying to decarbonize them. You're looking at the math of a new development project, or you're looking at the math of an operating asset, and you're actually trying to make the numbers pencil. I know Ivan, who's also been on the front lines in terms of actually saying, here's our decarbonization commitment. We're going to tie our debt cost to it. Putting your money where your mouth is. But as you try and take those efforts, what challenges are you facing?
The first thing I think, and regarding what you just said, Mark, is that you have to be very pragmatic. So you don't have to just say something and not being able to deliver it. At least this is the way we're looking at that. So it's very important to really do an actual diagnosis of your existing portfolio and what you want to do and the kind of performance you want to deliver. So I think that it's very key for us to look at this climate change as being two potential risks for us, where we think that it's both risks, not just one or the other, not only because we can't move the assets, so we have some existing assets and we don't want them to be flowed in the future. And we have also to deal with some cities where the regulation is going to and the policy is going to evolve. So we want to have assets which are going to be very integrated in their neighborhood. So that's very important for us to, again, be very self-aware of what we do and the way we're going to do it. So I would say that today, because we are definitely more connected and have more data, so we can do a lot of things, and we can't use that as an excuse to not move. We are very committed to action now with this net zero carbon target for 2040. And beyond that, what I can tell you is that maybe the transition in terms of the amount of capex we would have to put for the existing properties especially would not find really their place in the valuation traditional process that all the, and I'm not quoting any names, but all the names that the traditional players in the area, they are very stuck with their discounted cash flow, where they think that there's going to be a very slow discount because of being non-green, when in fact I think it's going to be probably black or white. At a point, something's not going to be just discounted, it's got to be zero. So I think it's the main challenge, trying to really push the oil industry, which has been very traditional. And to be honest, we have been just very spoiled as an industry. Real estate has made a lot of money over the years, and especially the last decade, which has been like tremendous for everybody. So we were not really pushed to question what we used to do, because we thought that the same recipes would lead to the same good outcome. But it's not. I don't think that it's the case. And if you don't want to have a very tough wake-up call when it's going to be too late, we have to move very fast now. But that's why I think, getting back to this valuation thing, definitely the actors of this industry have to consider the way we could really take into account in the numbers this new reality. And for me, what is very important, because I have to deliver performance for my shareholders, I'm working for the Quebecers, and they are expecting from me that I'm deliver money. I can tell you that they're expecting from me also that I'm going to deliver a real carbon performance. And my main challenge is really to try to tie all the time this financial performance to this carbon performance, and to tie it over the long way between the very beginning of the building, the construction, to the operation, and maybe the afterlife of the building too. So really to tie the all points, the all dots of the value chain, which is where I think Ivanhoe can play a big part, because we can pretend really knowing all these steps in the building life.
So I want to definitely come back to a couple of the things you said, because it really struck me, this question of valuations, and also the kind of collective action issue that might exist around that, right? I know that's one of the themes that we're probably going to bring out. So let's come back to that. Jonathan, you're all over the place, traveling to a bunch of cities, trying to figure out how to do these things in cities. Maybe anything to add on the challenges front that to what Mark and Natalie have already said?
Right. Well, I feel slightly odd to be looming over Mark and Natalie's shoulder there. Apologies for that. But I would definitely, first of all, second everything that first of all, Natalie, just picking up what you last said about valuation, and markets move based on prices. So if there's no price for something, if something is free, we will generally waste it. And at this point, our atmosphere, our planet is free. So we're wasting it. And unless we actually start to put a value on the common good that we have, well, it's not reasonable to expect people to do things that are essentially against their economic interests. So we're confining, therefore, our solution set to only those things that can be proved to make economic sense without taking into account the externality of our environment, which is a subset of a lot of things. So that is the first challenge, is how do we put a price on our environment? How do we incorporate that into our economic framework? And now, I think there is more movement in the last 12 months than there has been in the last 12 years, or 120 years, you could say, on putting prices on the externality. And I really feel like we're having tremendous momentum on this, and we should expect that, which then leads you to the next question of, well, is it high enough? And essentially, what could we do to get more projects through the window of economic feasibility? What is the thing that will, and the way you do that is by de-risking a project. So the second thing that we have to do, in addition to putting a price on something, is to lower the risk of doing sustainability and adaptation projects. And that risk comes in many forms. There's, of course, technology risk. And so anything that we can do to sort of commercialize and develop technologies at scale would be great. There's policy risk. It's like unpredictability is not your friend. So having a consistent track record of being able to sort of say, this is my policy and I will actually implement, and there are no exceptions. There is execution risk. There is plenty of people who say, I won't fund this project because I don't believe you can do it. So if somebody would come in and actually take that risk, and there are interesting examples of people who are going to put guarantees on construction risk for renewable energy projects, for example, you might very well de-risk that project to the point where you can fund it. So those are all, for me, those are the two economic challenges of put a price on it and then de-risk it. I could add to that the political challenge, which is that there are going to be people who object to the projects because these projects create dislocations. They do affect people. They affect jobs. They affect economies. And that is very real. And we need to address it. And we need to be transparent about it, saying those are also costs. The costs of actually the project itself and its impact on society, and how you address that in a community in a sustainable, inclusive way. That's the third challenge.
So let's pick up this thread of financing, right? You mentioned the valuations issue, right? And it's essentially if you're mispricing assets and then you're not creating the right incentives to invest in decarbonization, to invest in resilience, if you're not taking those into account in the actual valuation of the asset, right? And then, Jonathan, you brought up this issue of risk. How do we recognize risk, transfer risk, and then also how do we, assign the right value to the assets that we're consuming, whether those be, economic assets or natural assets, if I can use that term. Maybe Mark, going back to you, and then I would love just to open up for discussion on this. What are the creative things we can do to finance these things? Like what needs to happen here, right? Because one of the stories that we hear all the time is there's trillions of dollars of capital waiting on the sidelines. It all wants to get into adaptation. It all wants to get into decarbonization. But then you speak to mayors, for example, in some of the cities that need that money, and they're saying, hey, I've had a project on the books for 5 years. It's developed, it's structured. I'm not able to raise the funds for it, right? So how do we actually, in the action-oriented spirit of this conversation, what are the things we can do to close that gap? Anything you've seen or ideas or?
Yeah, I think I want to focus mostly on the positive where you can see things that are working and that can be translated. But there is, there's a kind of elephant in the room, particularly for the global south cities that we work with. The only realistic way that they're going to be able to adapt their city and flatten their emissions curve fast enough based on their current resources is if the flows of international development capital are really focused on achieving that transition in global south cities. And right at the moment, there's only one major development bank that even has a city climate finance facility of any real size. So that's got to change. But I think generally what we see is mayors using, kind of being flexible and innovative. The Mayor Lopez of Bogota was here last week. She's introducing now a metro for the first time in Bogota, a big extension of the Transmilenio, the bus rapid transit, but now based on electric buses. The biggest fleet of electric buses outside of China is in Bogota, not in a rich city in the US or Europe. And a massive extension of their cycle lanes. And she's doing that by bringing in on-street parking charges for the first time in her city, effectively a congestion pricing and some cordon charges, and then that's leveraged getting investment from her national government. Or taking a sort of very different example, different part of the world. I've been impressed bringing it in the sort of development arena, the way that the mayor of Oslo had determined that actually reducing emissions from construction in his city has become now their biggest chunk of emissions because they're so far ahead on so many other things, renewable energy and their transport system. And so has then used essentially municipal procurement to drive the market by saying that for our big municipal developments, they've got to be emission-free construction sites, even though the industry said at the outset, we'd love to do it, but the vehicles don't even exist at the moment. They now do, after having been given the incentive to do it. And by then now asking that want a 50% reduction in embedded emissions in the materials going into that construction, which there's tremendous innovation in the market here. I was on a panel the other day with the chief executive of a British engineering firm, Arup, who's saying that they are now only going to design zero carbon whole life cycle buildings, regardless of what their clients ask for. That's just what they're going to do. And I think here the engineering world wants to go in that direction, but where often the municipal authorities can help is by giving the leg up for the pioneers that this is where the public money is going to support that development.
That's exciting. Just that level of commitment, right? We're only going to do zero carbon. I've heard that from a few design firms as well, that they're seeing this gap between even they're almost taking a designed emissions approach equivalent to like a financed emissions, and they're saying, we can't design really high emissions in all the buildings we're building, or we can't, claim to be on the path to decarbonization. So
yeah, and as they know they can deliver it, The challenge now is to find the model that works for the developer that will make that financially viable, when we know it's technically viable, and we know in the cities where that's true that the political environment supports it and wants to make it happen.
Yeah. So what model works for the developer, Natalie? Or just have you seen any examples of creative financing structures or things that have unlocked in some of your new developments the ability to invest in low carbon buildings or retrofits?
I can tell you that for the time being, we have, you know, the beauty of our industry is that we were really playing all over the globe. So if it doesn't work somewhere, there is always some other possibilities. And what you said about replicating good examples and good practices works a lot in the industry. So we are able to do that in a city, and then we bring this project to somewhere else and say, okay, we have done that and we can do it in your city again. Then we have a lot of traction. So it's this kind of thing we should do, again, very pragmatically, so trying to find a way to mix the different criteria. But again, in terms of regarding, I would say, new developments, we have a lot of things available right now to make green building, to make really developments, and that's a big part of our net zero carbon initiative and commitments. We are really able to do developments, and we are committed to do everything net zero from 2025, which is tomorrow. So it means that we are almost ready to do it. So I think that for new developments, it's already happening. The main challenge still remains for existing assets and the retrofitting, which is much more complicated. But to be honest, that should be the part of the job where it's got to be probably more sophisticated to deal with it, but that's got to be more satisfactory, because, you know, I think that 75% of the existing assets got to be there in 10 years from now. So we have to deal with that. And the transition is more complicated to either finance and even technically to envisage. But it's really where I think the devil is lying. We have to deal with it. And that's why in our commitment we take into account, of course, the existing portfolio, because it would be too easy to just deal with the new developments. So I think that there we see some existing initiatives. I'm thinking about Italy, which is providing 5% more density if you retrofit an existing building in a green one. So I think it's this kind of initiative which could probably help less, I would say, willing developers to act on this part of the portfolio. And again, the transition is very key for the existing portfolio.
I was just looking at some questions from the audience that are coming in, but maybe we'll hold those for a sec. But please feel free, if you've got, for those in person, if you have the Slido app and have figured out how to use that, feel free to submit questions. And then for those online, again, you know, I think on the right-hand side of your screen, you should be able to submit questions. Maybe just, you know, one of the things that we've mentioned a few times when it comes to this question of financing, or one of the subtexts in that discussion, is a question of institutional collaboration, right? You know, if you're financing a new building, you have the lender who has made a net zero commitment, you have the equity investor who's made a net zero commitment, you've had the designer who's made a net zero commitment, you've had the city who's probably made a net zero commitment, but all of them have a different role to play, you know, just using a concrete example, in designing a new building. And one of the things that I think we've seen a lot is that there's a bit of a collective action problem in getting them all to the same table and helping them see the project in the same way. There's also, in the valuations example you brought up earlier, a bit of a collective action problem, because depending on which direction that goes, you know, I mean, you can comment on this more, but you know, I think many investors, whether it's in real estate or other assets, don't want to be the first to say our assets need to be devalued, right? And so, you know, maybe Natalie, starting with you, and then we can, yeah.
The way we have looked at that, and because, you know, getting back to your point, if we think about it as being something which is impossible because there is so many people around the table who are thinking different things, then you're not going anywhere. So the way we have looked at that is really, again, looking at all the value chain from and I would say deal it piece by piece. And for example, getting back to financing, we have been able to tie 12 lenders around the table with a two-way progressive margin with them. So if we decrease our footprint in carbon, then it's a bonus. And if we increase it, it's a penalty. So we are very committed. The lender is committed on the other side. So I would say that it's the way we turn intention into action and then action into legal commitment. So for us, that's the way to look at it, I would say, in a simple way, and try to find for any piece of the value chain the way people are thinking and what is going to make them move. So if you think about money, then you have a lot of people very interested in making money. So if you really try to use this leverage, it works. So for lenders, that's the way we have solved, I would say, the problem. And we have dealt with 8.5 billion over the last year. So it's a big amount. It's big numbers that we are talking about. It's not just one bank that we have been able to manage. It's really the whole, and it's the big names that you know, global names. So it's feasible. Then we have also tied our employees on also some incentives relating to what we do and what they do in terms of climate change initiatives. And I can tell you that it's also a win-win, because it's not only the way they can potentially make money, it's also the reason why they are joining Ivanhoe Cambridge today. So that's why it makes me very optimistic in the part that I'm dealing here with a big part of my industry, because besides capital, we need a lot of beautiful talents and brains. So it's the second thing. Third thing, so we deal piece by piece. Then the third thing is property management. Now we have more and more progressive leases when we incentive the property manager if they're able to decrease the carbon in the operations of the building. And then let's go to the asset management. And then the asset manager is definitely the last piece that we have to deal with, because as you know, most of their money comes from promote. And the promote, for the time being, is not really green. So we would like to implement a green promote, which would be directly relating to the amount of carbon they are going to be able to save. So if we do that, then we will have the complete chain, from the very beginning, again, of what we do until the end. So we're not there yet, and I'm sure there are some of my asset managers listening to me today, so they're going to be either very thrilled or afraid, I don't know, and I don't care. But it's the way I think we should look at that, because, again, you know, when you talk about promote to an asset manager, it's definitely something which is ringing a bell in his brain. So it's definitely, if you sit around the table and talk about it, I'm sure we're going to find a way to do it. So that's the way I'm looking at that. And again, if we think that we're going to have everybody agrees day one on everything and really thinking about all those targets the same way, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's a practical work with the debtors, work with the lenders, work with the equity investors, work with your property managers.
Exactly, yeah. Commitments, and then again legal agreements,
yeah.
And then it's. You know, I've been working for 30 years, and I can tell you that by my experience, when people are clear about the guidance and where they are heading, then most of the time it's delivered.
They can deliver, yeah. Mark, Jonathan, anything, you know, we've talked about the project level collective action. You know, as you think about mobile, you know, all the mayors that are trying to build these complex transit schemes, you know, those are obviously very complex from a stakeholder landscape perspective. Have you seen kind of new innovations, exciting new efforts in terms of that kind of institutional collaboration?
You know, I think it comes back to the simple thing in the end. It's the willingness and the leadership of somebody to make the collaboration happen. There's a good news story here, you know, today at COP. As one of my, I think, in fact, Mayor Khan is announcing at the moment $1 billion of new financing committed to deliver electric buses in Latin America. But you know, going back a few years here, we've really focused in C40 on driving a much faster transition to electric buses. When we first started talking to the major manufacturers, they said, "Okay, China's already happened. We'll go quicker in Europe and North America, but we need to keep on selling diesel in Latin America and Africa and the rest of the global south because the production lines are set up. And clearly, that is not a message anyone wants to hear. And actually, our attitude was we want to drive electrification in the places that most need it, where the air pollution is worse and where cities are fast developing. And so really focused on Latin America, made sure there was a really strong signal to the market from the mayors there, so got them all together to say they were going for electric buses in the next 5 years, and if they couldn't be provided by the European and North American manufacturers, China was ready and willing to supply. Got the manufacturers together, let them see the opportunity for constructing in Latin America as well, then brought together the finance industry to see the opportunity and farm, which was a different model from elsewhere in the world, where mostly you're looking actually private delivery of the bus service, but being able to prove that the lifetime cost of the bus was going to be lower as electric compared to diesel, and finding a model that would make that finance work. And now Latin America is our lead region on electric buses. So I think you can, that kind of political collaboration can really work with Jonathan's right, that if we get the pricing mechanism right, then it makes the job a lot easier. There's not going to be a delivery service in London now that runs on dirty, polluting vehicles, because the ultra-low emission zone just makes it too expensive to do that. So if we get those pricing mechanisms right, the collaboration will be a lot easier.
Yeah. Jonathan, any thoughts on interesting examples you've seen on the collaboration front? And then
Right,
I'll not last chance, but if you want to add any more questions, feel free to add them, and then we can go to those. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, okay, it's a great conversation. I want to thank the colleagues. I mean, in some ways, a city could be defined as a collective action problem. That is kind of what a city is. Cities are better or worse depending on how well they manage that problem, which I would argue is also an opportunity, in the sense that cities are what brings us together. And so naturally, we are not all the same. We have different points of view, and it's the capacity to craft out of that direction that enables a city to work. I have a good colleague who talks about this as the idea of an epistemic community, a community that talks to itself about itself. And having that conversation is the key. The ability to pull people together around the table saying, yeah, we recognize we have an issue and we'll go in this direction roughly. Because there's many different constituencies. You have, of course, the regulator, you have the customers, you have the companies, the competition, you have the investors, the money, and you have the talent, the people. And they all have to roughly agree on something, otherwise it doesn't happen. Now, they don't all have to agree the same thing at the same time. But I'll give two quick examples. One from China, which is which is the most sustainability oriented, which is completely unplanned, which was shared biking. Shared biking just happened. All of a sudden, miraculously, tens of millions of bicycles appeared on streets all across China. This was a triumph of market capitalism invading the public space. Cycling, as a result, increased by, I think, almost like 6 or 7 points of total trips in Shanghai and Beijing and a few other big cities. Until, of course, the natural consequence of that is that, you had bicycles littering the sidewalks everywhere. And so, yes, you did have to, at some point, start cleaning up the sidewalks. But it was just a proof that sometimes you can get amazing collective action produced by a single technology breakthrough, in this case, the use of QR codes on bicycles. So there's that. And another example would be from Los Angeles, where you have electric vehicle charging infrastructure, far ahead of pretty much every other city, I think, in the country, driven primarily by utility regulation and sort of incentives to the utilities to essentially create partnerships with local developers to put charging infrastructure in place. And without charging infrastructure, you won't have an electric vehicle. So, I think that is, so two different examples of how working together, both with the power of the state or through the power of technology, you can mobilize collective action.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to start going to some of the questions from the virtual participants, and then also, for those of you
cities because they see an idea and they've got the capacity to learn from it and copy it very quickly. But you know, one very large city I've been working with where the planning department is one person. So having, and that city's got 1 million refugees in the city and is experiencing incredibly extreme climate impacts. So I think, you know, when one is trying to get change coming from the business perspective or coming from the finance industry, you've got to help close that capacity barrier. There's going to be a political willingness, a political leadership, but the resource has got to be there to help design the regulation, put in place the policy mechanisms that is going to enable your great idea to work. You know, it's traditionally that's been the role of the development banks and the multilateral institutions, but there just isn't the scale of resource that's needed to move with the pace. You know, I think the other thing is the big difference is actually on the other foot. The scale of change that's required in the global north, if you're really looking at science-based targets, is extreme. So most of our European, North American cities are looking between 60 and 90%. In some cases, they've signed up to a full decarbonisation in the next 9 years. That means they've got to retrofit pretty much every building in their city. There are not any real plans that can show how you absolutely can do that. The whole of the market would have to be changed, and the regulation would have to be a lot tighter, and the powers would have to be very significantly devolved from national governments. And you know, this huge, unprecedented levels of public spending that we're seeing in response to the pandemic are going to have to genuinely be directed to a green and a just recovery rather than about 10% at the moment that is in any way green. So I've just given a whole long list of problems there, haven't I? But you know, it's back to the speed question.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a good tee up, and I think one of the things that you mentioned was just this massive challenge in the global north. Actually, I mean, you talked about capacity issues in the global south, but you also talked about this massive challenge of kind of the path dependency that we're on in the global north. Yeah, go for it, Natalie.
Yes, you know, I'm a very simple person, so you have understood the way I'm thinking. You know, if you think like that if there is a kind of opposition between two sides of the world, either through the hemisphere, or there is also some big difference between Europe and North America, and originating myself from Europe, I can really compare what we see in Canada and what is also very different in US, for example. But if you just stuck to this statement saying, okay, they're ahead or they lagging behind and they're not going to do it and they're not catching up, then you don't do anything. And I can tell you that on the other way, if you do, because I'm a private company, so if you look at the opportunity wherever they are, you can always find a partner who is completely aligned with what you want. And I can tell you, for example, we have a very big neighborhood development in Mumbai, 80 kilometers from Mumbai, with a partner. At a point, there's going to be 1 million people there. And I can tell you that some of North America or even some of the European cities would be very jealous to see the practices that we are able to stick to there. So there is, and it's because, again, it's just actionable. So we can't just, I think, just stay beyond the barrier and say, okay, we're waiting for all the authorization, all the policies, all the regulations. Sometimes you have to really design your own life and your own fate And then I can tell you, because I'm quoting this guy, but I could have quoted some other people in China or in South America. So there is a lot of very good initiatives which are so refreshing to see that it's really happening. And despite all the difficult conditions, those people, they decide that sometimes it's a blessing or a curse, and they decide that it's a blessing to move, and then to just not wonder every day if they're authorized to do it. So I think it's important because, you know, it's too easy to say we can't do anything, policies are not there yet, so we are just waiting, it's not our fault, we can't do anything. And if we say that, everybody can do it, because it's obvious that none of us has the whole answer, but all of us we have the answer. So we will try we have to find the angle and work very hard and very deep and very vertically in what we are very good at. And I think that maybe we're going to go somewhere.
And I think, you know, I thought I'd give such a problem-laden answer, and that's such a more positive look at it. If Mayor Aki Sawyer was here, Mayor of Freetown, what she'd be saying is, you know, it's we're addressing the same challenges, but just with very different solutions. All of our mayors at the moment are talking about how can you get a real job creation drive behind the recovery programme that proves to their population that there's just an upside to all of the climate action. You're going to get good green new jobs out of this, even if you feel threatened in your industry at the moment. In most of the wealthier cities, that looks like it's in the construction industry, it's in the retrofitting industry, it's in the transport industry. Mayor Aki Sawyer's got this program called Tree Town, Freetown, where she's actually done the data, she's analysed actually the biggest jobs growth protection in her city is in nature-based solutions in a very climate-threatened city. So huge tree planting program, but she's looked at also then where's the bioscience behind that, working with the university to be training up new graduates, thinking about the type of vegetation they're planting, the maintenance of that vegetation when it's in place. It's not just put the seed in the ground and it grows, but it's got to be managed. The products that can be used then from the new trees and others things that they've got the tourism industry that can come behind it, and it's gone from being an environmental program to essentially a job creation program.
Thank you for bringing her voice into the room. It's super helpful to have that example. Jonathan, anything to add from your side on this topic?
No, I think the colleagues have, Natalie and Marcus said it very well. I think we should take a positive attitude that, in the words of a former British politician, I am an optimist. There's not much point in being anything else. The point here is to actually make a difference. And I think that there are plenty of examples of folks who can. There is always a leader, as Natalie says. That we can, the people who are in front are there because they run faster. So before I continue to repeat cliches, I just want to second everything that the colleagues have said and say, we stand for progress, that there is actually, a better way of developing our energy, developing our buildings, developing our mobility, developing our agriculture. Those solutions are there. And so it is really about the entrepreneurship to unlock that. And reasonable people never really made a difference. It's always going to be about the unreasonable person who stands and says, I think this is possible, and does the work to persuade others, the customers, the talent, the regulator, the investors, to believe in their solution. And when she does that, then we have progress.
We have a couple questions from the audience. So just because there's a few thousand people virtually, if I could ask you just to really quickly state your question, and then I'll repeat it back, because I think the virtual, they won't pick it up on the mic. So why not in the back and then in the front? Carlos, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Alison Gowan from the City of London. And this morning I took part in a panel with City
Great, thank you. And I'll get both questions and then we'll go to the panel if that's all right. So this question was around, there was an emphasis in one of the prior discussions on just collaboration between different players in multiple cities, whether it's the occupiers, the builders, et cetera, and how we can create more of that collaboration. Carlos, over to you.
Thank you so much, and really excellent discussion. Thank you, Brody and panelists. Really on point and covering all the different dimensions and levels that are crucial here. I wanted to narrow my question at two levels. First is on physical climate risk, and second is on the valuation. And I really like your points on being realistic in where we want to go. We cannot go yet about adjusting cash flow projections, discount rates, but there is something that we can do there. And my question is, do you agree with the valuation risk and opportunity that we have? And I believe that there's one particular dimension that maybe we haven't covered, and I would be particularly interested, is the role of cost of capital and credit quality. And certainly, we see, and I represent Willis Towers Watson and the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, and what we're seeing is that there are inefficiencies in the recognition of that delta capex in terms of the improved performance of the asset, cash flow predictability, and accordingly, credit quality, cost of capital. Do you see that as a driving force in that adjustment to valuation? Combined, of course, with policy regulation that I think that's been wonderfully covered in the discussion. What are the two roles of regulation enforcing, cost of capital rewarding, that adjustment to really bring resilience to the point of being an opportunity, not being an additional cost, a tedious process. And I think that this conversation excellent illustration that we are really going there. But I would just be very interested in your thoughts.
So the second question for those that are, thank you, Carlos, for those that are online, if you couldn't hear it, was, there's this real opportunity in resilience investment. It has an impact on asset valuations. And what is the role in the cost of capital and changes to that cost of capital in encouraging those investments, if I can paraphrase? Over to anyone who would want to jump in on either of those questions.
Can I start with the second question, and then we can go back to the first? That's exactly the point. The thing is that for the time being, I guess most of us know here and maybe in the audience virtually, the traditional way to evaluate a building is a DCF, discounted cash flow, when you have just streams of expenses and revenues taken into account, and then some magic rates. And for the time being, what we see is that there is a very small discount, which is reflected, in fact, in the rates in a building which doesn't seem to be so great in terms of regulation, but nothing very dramatical. But on the contrary, if you want to do a real transitioning of your building and put a bigger bank of capex, then you have immediately a big bump in your DCF and then a minus 15% or 20% in the value. So it doesn't work. Because if we do that this way, then of course the transitioning I was talking about for the existing assets is not going to happen. Because nobody around the world is going to say, okay, I'm fine with minus 15 or 20. So that's exactly where I think we should collaborate and think about the way we should be more realistic about really assessing the premium and the discount. And the discount, according to me, should be for the people who are not going to do anything, instead of for the people who are going to do something. Because for the time being, it's exactly the contrary with what we have dealt with the banks, when you have a bonus if you do well, and you have a penalty if you don't. With valuations, it's exactly the contrary. So you see, there is something which doesn't work. To be honest, I have some ideas, but I need to be not alone around the table, because obviously for this question, I'm the opposite of the people who are going to really lead the conversation and decide. But I really think that if we can, in a way or another, solve that, it could really free a bigger amount of financing, funding, and probably interest of a lot of investors around the table. So it's definitely, you are exactly pointing out the reality and the discrepancy between what we're aiming at and the very traditional DCF, which is still reflecting the past, but not the future. And to be honest, it was designed years ago when nobody was even thinking about it. So it's nobody's fault. But now we know we have to fix it, and that's the way I think we're looking at that. And that just a little bit about the first question, if I may. I think that it's really pointing out, we're talking here a lot about the E of ESG, of course. That's the topic. But, in fact, S and G are very close to E ways. And if we want to really deal with the E in a proper manner, we have to think always about the S and the G. And it's exactly the collaboration you were talking about between a city and a construction company or whatever. We won the C40 contest in Montreal with Montreal Tomorrow with my partners Paul Merlot and Cogir. We're very, very proud of that. And what we do here is more than a building. It's mixed use with affordable home. So in fact, for me, it's more a social object than a development. And that's why I like it so much, and thank you to have given us this opportunity. But I think, again, it's the way we should, as a developer, real estate professional, to think about the way we are going to really live and equip the world instead of just building something and hope that somebody will come and let it. So that's our new reality, and it's something which is far different from the traditional culture of the industry. But again, if we do that, there is no, beyond the E, we can find a lot of solution with the S and the G. So we have to, it's also another way to collaborate between those different angles.
Well, you probably will have to cut off my mic, Brody, get me talking about the why collaboration.
All right,
get ready
to.
I would just say first, as someone who, I'm lucky enough, our office is based in the headquarters for C40 is based in the City of London, and the leadership from the corporation in London has been magnificent. I mean, it really, on things like, I'm a cyclist cycling through central London now on segregated cycleways, suddenly overnight, I can't imagine the stakeholder conversations that came together to make that possible and successful. But my lesson from, I've been working with cities now in the public and the private sector 20 years, the collaboration really, really works. It is, for very good reasons, most mayors do not want to be the first to do anything, because the amount of political capital that you have to spend to be truly innovative, doing a really difficult thing is huge, and the price of failure is often instant. And so the ability to, for every city to be a leader in one thing, two things, but then to copy the rest, reduce those transaction costs for the cities that have gone through it themselves. Sadiq Khan says quite frequently he'd much rather copy something that works than invent something that doesn't. And there are not patents on good ideas in city government, so it's very easy for it to translate. Where I really hope and think we can do better, and it's part of the reason I love working with colleagues at McKinsey and being at a forum like this, is I wish we could start to translate the fantastic relationships between the big corporate players in many of our cities that works in one city to the many other cities where they're also based. It's and the reverse of that, it's quite frustrating to find a company that's been absolutely world leading on a green building code or whatever it is in city X and just delivering against the regulation in the other cities. And I think if we could working together to try and get the pioneers in the business sector with the pioneers in the governmental sector, we could get that international collaboration making even more of a difference.
That's why we're here.
Indeed.
Well, so the seconds are ticking red now. Thank you all very much for joining. I want to end with just a rapid fire. You've got a magic wand, something you wish can happen that will help accelerate action in cities. Maybe Natalie, first to you, Jonathan, and then Mark.
Sure.
That works?
Same carbon price everywhere, which will avoid any kind of discrepancy between one country to the other. That would help. But I could probably give a long list of my wishes, but I will tell you that.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Recognize the moral hazard of kicking the can down the road. Every time we bail out a flooded community and tell them to rebuild in the same place, we're not making things better for them, nor for us. And every time we grandfather in a high carbon building, we're not making things better for them or for us. face the reality that we are going to have to invest in order to have a better future.
And I guess as we're at COP, this is an intergovernmental sort of gathering. I'd like to see national governments devolving the powers to city governments to let them take the really difficult, brave decisions. They're bringing in the widespread congestion pricing, or whatever it is. Let them have a go at it and do the tough stuff, and I think we'd see things moving a lot faster.
Thank you all very much for joining. Thank you to those who are in Glasgow for joining in person, and for everyone online for joining as well. You know, obviously just one part of the conversation, but really appreciate you all joining. Thank you very much.